There followed a string of threats and a tremendous warning. 6 days later, the emperor returned to the subject in the Moniteur, like a journalist who knows his trade. He passed in review the rumors that were current and ended with this declaration: "We have said, and we repeat, that if France were to use her influence with regard to any chances affecting the sovereign pontiff, it would rather be for the advantage of the Holy Father and to increase both his dignity and domains than with any intention of diminishing them." The favorable impression of this could hardly be destroyed by the announcement that the emperor was unlikely to forget either the duties which attached to the powers that had been granted him by the Commission of Lyon, or the personal glory he had gained by twice giving back their independence to the conquered states which he had twice conquered. But although he left this door open for retreat, he hoped that the cardinals would not see it. He felt certain of the legate, and he was not wrong. But still he redoubled his attentions to him. Not only did he pin the grand star of the Legion upon his command with his own hand in the Invalides, but he also caused to be inserted in the Moniteur the letter with which the Grand Chancellor had sent his brevet to the Cardinal. "You are the first foreigner, my Lord Cardinal, whom His Majesty has decorated with the Legion of Honor. This distinction is justly due to the representative of the sovereign pontiff, to the illustrious prelate, the skillful politician, and statesman-like minister who has won the gratitude of France and the admiration of Europe." Finally, he personally wrote 2 letters from Pontebrique direct to the Pope on the 3rd of August. In the one, he assured him of the consequences which might result from the extradition of the Franco-Russian immigrants and announced that they had been set at liberty. In the other, he assured the Pope on the subject of the organic laws of the Italian Concordat. "We have ordered the Vice President to submit to us as soon as possible the scheme for putting in force a Concordat. Our intention is to examine rigorously every clause of it and to remove anything that might be prejudicial to what has been agreed on between us." Thus, in this political seesaw, which he thoroughly understood, he allowed the balance to be on the side of the Pope. At least, he made it appear so. These were indeed only promises, but they were such as would most appeal to the Pope. Napoleon was of opinion that his nicety was well timed, especially as Talleyrand also had it just by the hand of his secretary, Bishop Bernier, the principal promoter of the Concordat, a detailed note to Capera on the 18th of July, wherein he met all the objections of the cardinals in a tone that showed plainly the offense our refusal would give to the emperor. "His Majesty," wrote Talleyrand, "instructs me to express his great surprise that the confidential proposal which he made to His Holiness about his coming to Paris for the ceremony of the coronation should have met with difficulties. And after enumerating the advantages which the Church would gain from his journey, so useful to religion, and after hinting that the organic articles were but one reason, though more for His Holiness's coming to France, the minister emphasized the sacred claims and the gratitude of the Church which the Emperor had displayed to the Holy See and all Europe, the reopened churches, the restored altars, the clergy and priesthood organized the endowment of chapters and foundation of seminaries, the 20 million set aside for the payment of ministers, the guaranteed integrity of the states of the Church, the cession of Pesaro, the fortress of St. Leon, and the Duchy of Urbino to His Holiness, the conclusion and ratification of the Italian Concordat, the rapidly proceeding negotiations for the Germanic Concordat, the re-establishment of the foreign missions, the deliverance of the Eastern Catholics from persecution, and the enforcement of their protection by the Divan. These were the benefits conferred by the emperor on the Roman Church. What other sovereign could lay claim to having done so much within the space of 2 or 3 years? For vindication, Talleyrand passed on to meet the objections. Chief among these was the constitutional oath, but what had this oath to do in reality with His Holiness's journey? The taking of it was to constitute an entirely separate ceremony in the presence of the people and certain officials properly appointed by the government and the Senatus Consultum. Besides, why should a meaning be attached to this oath which it did not bear? Laws of the Concordat only meant the Concordat itself. Freedom of worship did not mean approval of the different creeds. Then, as to the assurances to be given, His Majesty undertakes to consider all claims in the subject of the organic articles with his usual justice and impartiality. The so-called constitutional bishops would be recalled to a sense of their proper duty. No demand or request compatible with the rights of the sovereign or the honor and welfare of the French nation will be refused. His Majesty does not invite His Holiness to come and consecrate the first moments of his empire in the name of heaven without fully and worthily recognizing the honor and greatness of such a privilege. The rest was smooth sailing. The letter of invitation to be transmitted by two bishops, certainly if it is possible for them to absent themselves from their vast dioceses at a time when they are accustomed to pay their pastoral visitations, the use of the Roman service. His Majesty knows well the venerable and sacred character of the usages of the Church, and his present request is but another proof of his respect for them. All details of the ceremony were to be settled mutually in Paris, but the Pope was urged to arrive there on the 18th of Brumaire, the day already fixed, unless some unforeseen circumstance should delay him for a few days. While Bernier penned these letters, while Fesch busied himself officiously promising wonders, and Talleyrand redoubled his persuasions, Caperat also made supplications urging the advantages of a prompt acceptance, the dangers of refusal, and the inconveniences of delay. But he was overzealous, and by wishing to do too much, furnished Consalvi with the occasion for fresh objections. Had Caperat misunderstood Talleyrand? Had Talleyrand been inexplicit, or had he purposely slipped in a certain phrase as a sop to the opposers of the emperor's plan? However that may be, Caperat had made the proposal that His Holiness should come to Paris simply to perform the consecration of the emperor, whilst the coronation would be considered as a purely civil ceremony, which would take place separately at the Church of the Invalides, whence the procession would proceed to the Champ de Mars. Consalvi had already sharply rebuked Caperat in his dispatch on the 1st of August with being too hasty, with having declared that the Pope had decided to come when nothing was really settled, and having thus put the Holy Father in a false position if the answers of the French government were unsatisfactory and the plan might happen to fall through. On receipt of Caperat's last note, the secretary now raised a most essential point, which might possibly upset the scheme of this troublesome invitation. His Holiness has learnt with extreme surprise that the Holy Father is to perform only the consecration of the emperor. On the same day, he wrote to Fesch, who had at last succeeded in getting his finger in the negotiation. The Holy Father has been asked to travel to Paris to perform the ceremony of the coronation and the consecration. If he accepts the invitation, he insists that the ceremony shall not be abridged. Such an abridgment is directly contrary to the invitation which was first made to him. The secretary then exactly recapitulated the terms of the invitation and insisted on the coronation forming an integral part of the ceremony. It is sufficient, he said, to read through the service to perceive the importance which the emperors attached to receiving their crown, as well as their consecration from the Pope. They considered in their piety that the acceptance of this crown from the hands of Christ's vicar endowed them with special grace in ruling and governing their subject people with justice and foresight. Fesch, without any further instructions, hastened the same day to answer that there was no question separating the coronation from the consecration. There might perhaps be, he wrote, before or after the consecration, a purely civil ceremony in which the emperor should receive a crown, a ceremony which would serve as a pattern and example for future occasions, but that would not prevent the emperor, first of all, being crowned by His Holiness in the ceremony of the consecration. Consalvi was not satisfied. His diplomatic sense was so keen that he discovered the snare before Fesch and Caperat knew that it had been set, probably before Napoleon had thought of setting it. He was led by that single sentence of Caperat through a series of deductive conclusions to believe that in some way or another Napoleon would refuse to receive the crown from the hands of the Pope on the pretext of regarding it as a sign of vassalage. Seeing, however, that there was an expectation of his preventing the journey, he determined that if it did please, the Church should reap the advantage and triumphantly behold the revolution in a humble and supplicating position before her. Accordingly, he wished the assurances given him by Fesch to be confirmed that perhaps disquieted him. He insisted on receiving from Paris a solemn and absolute pledge that the Pope should perform both the consecration and the coronation. Fesch answered stoutly that he was himself entrusted with the negotiations and could enter into any engagements, whereupon Consalvi, on the 16th of August, reiterated his criticisms of the scheme.